Good evening. Tonight, we're wandering into the clattering, smoky world of a medieval castle kitchen. Before we step inside, make yourself comfortable, maybe dim the lights, pull up a blanket, and if these quiet journeys help you rest, you might consider subscribing, but only if you feel like it. No pressure at all. Now, let's slip into the scene. You wake before dawn, curled in a cramped loft above the kitchens. Reality check. It's less romantic than it sounds. Your face is already streaked with soot, your nose filled with dust, and your breakfast is still at least an hour away. You lean closer, blowing gently, the way you've been taught. A faint wisp of smoke curls up, then another, until a tiny flare licks at the dark. You add a handful of straw, watching it catch almost reluctantly, the flame trembling before it steadies. The fire sighs back to life, a little hungrier now, a little louder. The hearth itself is enormous, big enough that a grown man could stand inside it if he dared. Blackened stones rise high around it, coated with years of smoke. Hooks dangle above, ready to hold cauldrons and kettles. Soot flakes cling like fur to the beams overhead. And still, this is the heart of the castle, as necessary as walls and soldiers, as trusted as the chapel bell. You add a split log, damp at the edges, and watch it hiss as the flame takes hold. The sound fills the chamber, echoing slightly in the vast stone walls. It's almost comforting, if you ignore the grit under your nails and the fact that your hair already smells of smoke again. A peculiar belief surfaces in your mind. Some say that if the ashes are left untended, mischievous spirits slip into the hearth to sulk and spoil the day's meals. You glance at the fire, now stronger, and feel faintly relieved you woke when you did. Behind you, the kitchen stirs. A boy yawns loudly, dragging his feet as he fetches buckets. Someone sneezes, the sound sharp against the muffled crackle. Outside, the faintest hint of dawn seeps through a slit window, pale and cold. You stoke the flames higher, shoulders relaxing slightly, now that the worst of the morning's task is done. Reality check. You've not even had a bite to eat, and already you're covered in soot. But the hearth is alive, and with it, the castle can breathe again. You sit back on your heels, letting the warmth reach your stiff fingers at last, and listen to the steady hum of fire filling the chamber, knowing your next step is to find a crust of bread and the weak ale that passes for strength. The beams overhead press low, darkened with soot, and the straw beneath you shifts noisily as you stir. The air is thick and stale, heavy with the mingled scents of old grease, smoke, and last night's stew still clinging stubbornly to the rafters. Reality check. Your dreams have not been peaceful visions of green meadows, but a long, steamy replay of yesterday's pottage. Your throat itches with smoke, your eyes blink against the gloom. The only light comes from the faint red glow of embers down below, shining weakly through the gaps in the floorboards. Each breath carries a reminder that you've spent the night sleeping in what is essentially a chimney with a bed. You roll onto your side, brushing crumbs of straw from your cheek. The loft is not yours alone. Other kitchen hands stir beside you, bundled in coarse blankets, their snores and sighs a chorus of fatigue. You shift carefully so as not to elbow anyone, though space is so tight that one careless move could topple you into the blackened pots stacked near the ladder. From below comes a sound, the faint crackle of the great hearth still alive, and the quiet drip of fat congealing in a pan, forgotten overnight. The castle rule is simple. The fire must never die. It is the heart of the kitchen, and therefore of the household. But keeping it alive means you, the unlucky cook, must wake with the roosters, or earlier, if you count the bells that will soon toll. You rub your arms, chilled by the draft sneaking in from the high arrow slits. Winter air makes its way into every corner of stone. You pull your cloak tighter, though it smells almost as much of smoke as the loft itself. A peculiar thought crosses your mind. Some said that sleeping too close to kitchens would make your skin take on the flavor of stew. You touch your cheek absently, half amused, half resigned. Perhaps that explains why you always smell faintly of onions. Your stomach grumbles, though you know better than to expect much. A crumb of stale bread waits below, perhaps softened with a sip of weak ale if you're lucky. Reality check. Cooks may prepare feasts for lords and ladies, but your own first meal is usually closer to survival ration than banquet. You shift again, sitting up now, your head brushing the beam above. The loft creaks, dust and soot drifting lazily down into the kitchen proper. Someone coughs in their sleep. Someone else mutters and pulls a blanket tighter. But you, rubbing the smoke from your eyes, already know that your day has begun. And as you set your feet to the ladder rungs, lowering yourself into the half-light of the kitchen below, you're greeted by the waiting embers, ready to be coaxed into flame long before the sun itself has risen. You grip the ladder, its rungs smooth from countless feet, and lower yourself into the kitchen proper. The air thickens immediately, smoky and warm in uneven patches, as if the night never truly ended here. Your bare feet touch the cool flagstones, and you shuffle toward the great hearth, the one constant in this cavern of stone. The fire never really dies. Even after hours of neglect, the embers glow faintly under their blanket of gray. The tradition is as old as the castle itself, banking the ashes each night, covering the coals so they sleep without suffocating. You crouch low, rubbing your arms against the chill, and stare at the pile. It looks like nothing more than dull soot, lifeless dust. But you know better. You pick up the iron poker, its handle cold in your hand, and prod carefully. Ash shifts like sand, falling away to reveal the glow beneath. Small, stubborn coals, red and patient, waiting to be fed. You wipe the soot from your palms onto your tunic. Not that it makes a difference, since the fabric is already more gray than brown, and glance toward the side table where the morning's meal waits. If you can call it a meal. A loaf of bread sits there, dark, crusted, and hard. Yesterday's work, or perhaps the day before. The knife beside it has already left jagged gouges in the loaf, proof that others have had their turn sawing away at it. A peculiar saying comes to mind. Some believed spilling water on the way back was an omen of quarrels to come. By that logic, you are destined for an argument before the bread is baked, because every few steps sends a cold splash over your ankles. Around you, the castle begins to wake in earnest. Servants hurry past with baskets. Dogs bark and chase one another near the gate, and the faint clang of the smith's hammer begins to echo from the forge. You move slowly through it all, steady but lumbering, the buckets dragging your steps into a lopsided march. By the time you re-enter the kitchen, your shoulders burn and your arms tingle with the effort. You lower the yoke onto its hooks by the hearth, the buckets sloshing one last time before they settle. The fire hisses in greeting as water splatters onto hot stone, sending up a puff of steam that briefly clears the air of smoke. Reality check. You will make this trip again and again until the day is done. Boiling, brewing, scouring. Every task in the kitchen demands water, and you are its faithful mule. You wipe your forehead with the back of your hand, leaving a streak of soot where sweat once was, and glance toward the knives waiting on the bench. They are dull from yesterday's work, and before the day can truly begin, they'll need sharpening against the stone. You break off a piece with effort, the crust resisting like wood. The crumb inside is dense and chewy, flecked with husks of grain. This is not the bread of noble feasts, puffed and airy, baked with fine white flour. This is servant's bread, coarse, sturdy, and likely to last a week if you let it. Reality check. You'll burn more calories chewing this crust than you'll gain from eating it. Beside the bread is a small cup of ale, thin and watery, poured from the barrel in the corner. Not the heady, festive brew of the hall, but small beer, brewed weak enough for children, strong enough to be safer than well water. You dunk the bread into the cup, letting the liquid soften the crust. The bread slumps almost immediately, becoming less chew and more paste. You raise it to your mouth, chewing slowly. The taste is faintly sour, faintly bitter, with a hint of smoke that has nothing to do with brewing and everything to do with the kitchen air. Still, it slides down easier than it would dry. Peculiar custom says that dipping bread this way saves the teeth, though you suspect what it really saves is patience. Others gather around the table, each breaking their share. No one speaks much. Mornings in the kitchen are quiet, voices hushed by sleep and the weight of tasks ahead. The crackle of the hearth fills the silence, along with the drip of water from the buckets just returned from the well. You take another bite, your jaw working steadily. The ale warms your chest, not enough to stir cheer, but enough to settle the chill from your loft bed awakening. Your stomach begins to loosen just slightly, as if acknowledging that this will have to do. Reality check. Cooks may prepare banquets of venison, pastries, and spiced wine, but your own strength begins here: stale bread, weak ale, and the faint hope it lasts until noon. You set the crust aside, wiping your fingers on the table's edge, and rise from the bench. Already the day pulls you toward the next task, one that requires more strength than this poor breakfast provides, fetching water, bucket after bucket, before the Lord's table can even dream of eating. You step outside into the courtyard, the chill of early morning settling over the stones. The sun is barely up, a pale suggestion behind clouds, but the castle is already stirring. Pigeons clatter off the roof line, a guard yawns on the wall walk, and you, unlucky cook, trudge toward the well with shoulders already bracing for the wait to come. The yoke rests nearby, a curved beam of wood worn smooth where it has pressed into countless necks. You lift it, settle it across your shoulders, and feel its familiar pinch. 2 empty buckets dangle from its ends, swaying slightly as you adjust your balance. Reality check. You may have dreamt of stirring fragrant stews or carving roasted meats, but more often your job is closer to draft animal in an apron. The well is deep, its stone rim damp from constant use. You lower the rope hand over hand, listening to the faint splash when the bucket strikes water. The crank squeals as you haul it back up, your arms straining already. Cold droplets trail down the rope, spotting your sleeves, and when the bucket finally clears the lip, it sloshes generously onto your boots. You hook it to the yoke, then repeat the process for the second. The water gleams in the faint light, rippling, heavy. By the time you straighten and lift, your knees protest, and the yoke bites harder into your shoulders. You take a cautious step, then another, the bucket swaying like pendulums that would very much like to topple you into the mud. You lower yourself onto the bench by the kitchen wall, shoulders still humming from the weight of the water yoke. Before you, on the scarred wooden table, lies the day's next duty. Knives of every size, dulled by yesterday's hacking through joints of meat and splitting hard loaves. Their edges glint faintly in the half-light, more weary than sharp, and you know they won't last the day unless you coax them back to life. The air feels thicker here, your breath catching as though you're inhaling the history of every meal stored since summer. Onion strings hang in bundles from the beams above, their papery skins rattling when a draft slips through the cracks. They release their own perfume, sharp, tear-stinging, adding to the already impressive assault on your senses. Peculiar as it sounds, some cooks swore onions stored this way would guard against sickness, as if their fumes could chase away more than hunger. You pause beside a barrel, prying off the lid just enough to peer inside. Layers of fish glisten in their salty bath, pale and waxy. You resist the urge to step back too quickly. It's food, technically, though at this stage it looks more like a dare. You lower the lid carefully, telling yourself the knights will be too hungry to ask questions when it's finally boiled. Further along, you find baskets of dried beans, sacks of coarse flour, and the occasional wheel of cheese cracked at the edges but still precious. Everything smells faintly of everything else, as if the storeroom itself is a stew, each ingredient lending its note to the mix. Reality check. Appetite here is less about desire and more about endurance. By the time these preserved stores make their way into the pot, your job is less about flavor and more about disguise. Herbs, onions, ale, anything to convince the diners that winter food still tastes of summer. You shift a sack onto your shoulder, the rough cloth scraping your neck, and begin the trudge back toward the kitchen. Behind you, the storeroom sighs as the door shuts, sealing in its chorus of smells. Ahead, the hearth crackles, waiting for your burden to be tipped into a pot vast enough to feed half the castle. The whetstone rests nearby, heavy and smooth, its surface slickened with a film of oil. You set the first knife against it and draw the blade slowly, the sound a long, steady rasp that echoes faintly against the stone walls. Again and again you repeat the motion, sparks of metal scent rising into the smoky air. Reality check. This is not the glamorous side of cookery. No spices, no golden roasts, just sore wrists, aching shoulders, and the faint worry that one slip might shorten the day in more ways than one. The knives are precious, not easily replaced. A single lost blade could mean weeks of clumsy work, hacking with dull edges that tear rather than slice. You pause to inspect the edge, running your thumb gently across it, careful not to press. The steel gleams faintly sharper, ready to face the endless chopping of onions, roots, and salted meat. As another cook shuffles past, he reaches instinctively to hand you a second knife. You draw back slightly, shaking your head. Everyone knows the superstition. Never pass a blade directly from hand to hand, or you risk cutting the friendship. Instead, he sets it down on the table, and only then do you pick it up. Peculiar though it sounds, no one in the kitchen dares test it. In a place where tempers already run hot, why tempt fate with steel? You work through each blade in turn, the rhythm of scrape and pause becoming almost meditative. The fire crackles in the background. Water drips steadily into a basin, and the distant clang of the smith continues in the yard. Around you, the kitchen stirs more fully awake. A scullion coughs. A boy fetches onions. Someone else curses softly as a pot tips too soon. Yet you keep your focus on the slow, steady sharpening, bringing order to steel before chaos arrives with the day's demands. By the time you finish, your hands are slick with oil, your arms humming with the effort, but the knives lie ready in their row, gleaming, sharp, and a little menacing against the wooden board. Reality check. You'll likely blunt them all before nightfall, carving through sinew, bread crust, and whatever the steward drops onto your table next. But for now, you've bought yourself a brief reprieve. You wipe your palms on your apron, leaving streaks of oil across the already smoke-stained fabric, and glance toward the door to the storerooms. The air drifting from that direction already carries its unmistakable perfume, onions, salt, and fish that has waited too long. Your next task waits there, pungent and persistent. You push open the heavy door to the storerooms, its hinges groaning in protest. The air that greets you is cooler than the kitchen, but far from refreshing. It wraps around you like a damp cloak, heavy with a tang of salt, onions, and something faintly sour. Your nose wrinkles instinctively. Reality check. If you were hoping for a whiff of fresh-baked bread, you're in the wrong building entirely. Rows of barrels stretch along the stone walls, each sealed with wax or cloth, their wooden sides crusted with salt that has leached out over months. Some are filled with fish packed so tightly that the smell alone could convince you the sea itself has died here. The odor is sharp, pungent, and layered. First salt, then brine, then the unmistakable hint of flesh that's been waiting patiently since last autumn. You step carefully, the floor damp underfoot where brine has seeped through staves. Your boots stick slightly as you move, each step pulling with a faint squelch. You set down the sack with a thud, wipe your forehead with the back of your sleeve, and glance toward the cauldron that already hangs over the fire. It dominates the hearth, an iron belly so vast it seems capable of swallowing anything you throw at it. And you often do. The chain groans under its weight, and steam curls from its rim, carrying with it the smell of salted fish, onions, and yesterday's leftovers mingling into something vaguely edible. You keep your movement steady, resisting the urge to flick a morsel their way. Too many eyes are watching, not just theirs but the steward's, and he counts meat as carefully as coin. As you work, a peculiar superstition echoes in your mind. It is said that tasting a dish too soon, before it is offered at the Lord's table, will curse the meal. Whether the curse spoils flavor or invites ill fortune, no one seems certain. Still, the warning holds weight in a kitchen where accidents happen easily. You swallow your hunger and carry on, carving, trimming, arranging. The cuts go onto a spit, slicked with fat, then lowered toward the fire where the flames lick eagerly at the dripping juices. The smell rises almost at once, rich and mouth-watering, filling the air with something that seems both heavenly and cruel. The garrison stew gurgles behind you, thick as mud, while here the aroma of roast venison curls into every corner of the kitchen. Servants edge closer, some pretending to fetch herbs or tend pots, others simply watching with faint hope. You shake your head slightly, more in sympathy than reprimand. Reality check. If a scrap falls to the floor, the dog will claim it long before a kitchen hand can. The spit turns slowly, glistening. You wipe your hands on your apron, streaking it with fat that already stiffens the cloth. Your stomach clenches with each drip of juice into the fire, each hiss reminding you how far the Lord's plate is from your own. And as the meat roasts, filling the chamber with its impossible promise, you know the next battle will not be with hunger or envy, but with the smoke itself, which thickens in the rafters until your eyes water with tears you can't quite blame on onions. You grip the wooden paddle, more oar than the spoon, and plunge it into the broth. The liquid resists at first, thick from everything already simmering within. You push and stir, arms straining, shoulders burning, as if rowing across a sea of soup. Reality check. It may be called stew, but by the time you're done, it will resemble a swamp. Filling, yes, but hardly inspiring. Sweat beads on your forehead, trickling down your temple. Objective. The heat from the fire wraps around you, stifling, until you feel more boiled than the food itself. A drop of sweat slips from your brow into the pot, and you tell yourself it hardly matters. In truth, the cauldron is so enormous that your contribution is just one seasoning among many. Someone lugs over a basket of bread, loaves hard enough to dent a table. Without ceremony, they toss them straight into the cauldron. The bread sinks, soaks, and swells, turning the broth into something thicker, almost gelatinous. Peculiar practice though it is, cooks have long known that stale bread bulks out a meal, filling hungry bellies more cheaply than meat. The result, however, is closer to glue than soup. You lean harder into the stirring, breaking apart the loaves with your paddle. Chunks drift past, soggy on the outside, still stubbornly solid within. Steam fogs your vision, your hair clinging damply to your face. The smell grows heavier, a fusion of yeast, brine, and onion sharpness. You breathe it in until your stomach tightens, unsure if it's hunger or weariness. Around you, the kitchen hums with chaos. Boys peel root vegetables, skins piling on the floor. A girl carries herbs, her apron dusted green. The steward's voice echoes from the hall, already demanding haste, though the day has barely begun. You stir and stir again, your paddle dragging through the mass like a plow through stubborn soil. Reality check. Knights may dream of venison and spiced wine, but for the garrison, this bubbling cauldron is the true banquet, a meal that fills, even if it doesn't delight. And you, red-faced and sweating, are its unwilling priest, presiding over the liturgy of glue stew. At last, you pause, leaning on the paddle, breath heavy. The cauldron bubbles thickly, sighing as if satisfied. You wipe your forehead again, smear another streak of soot across your skin, and glance at the table where cuts of meat wait to be trimmed for the Lord's finer supper. The garrison may make do with glue, but the high table expects its own kind of miracle. You set the paddle aside, arms trembling from the weight of it, and move to the trestle table where a slab of meat waits. Compared to the gluey stew simmering behind you, this is the kitchen's treasure, a joint of venison, thick and red, destined for the Lord's table. The difference is clear. Soldiers may fill their bellies with bread-thickened broth, but nobility dines on flesh carved clean and roasted to impress. The knife in your hand glides more easily now, sharpened earlier against the whetstone. You trim away sinew, slice neatly through fat, and set aside the choicest cuts for roasting. Each piece gleams with promise, the sort of meal you might dream about on a long winter's night. Reality check. You'll never taste it. At best, a corner of gristle might come your way, if it's left behind after the feast. Other servants hover nearby, eyes following your hands. Their expressions are carefully neutral, but you know the thought that lingers in every mind. Perhaps a scrap might fall, perhaps a sliver might be overlooked. Hunger sharpens more than knives. You squint against the haze, eyes watering as another wave of smoke rolls downward from the rafters. The fire roars, fed with fresh logs to please the spit, but without a chimney to carry it away. The smoke pools beneath the ceiling like an unwanted guest. It thickens until every breath scratches your throat and every blink brings fresh tears. Reality check. The seasoning in this kitchen is less salt and pepper, and more ash and human misery. The loaves begin to rise, their surfaces cracking slightly, steam venting in little sighs. A boy hovers nearby, broom in hand, pretending to sweep but really waiting for a chance to snatch the heel of a loaf when it cools. You raise an eyebrow at him, and he quickly bends to his sweeping. Peculiar custom whispers in the back of your mind. Some insist whistling, as the bread bakes keeps it honest, guarding against loaves collapsing in shame. Whether true or not, you purse your lips and let out a low, tuneless whistle, the sound threading through the crackle of the fire. The boy looks up and grins, though he wisely says nothing. The bread darkens steadily, crusts turning a warm brown. You tap one with the peel, listening for the hollow note that tells you it's ready. The sound echoes faintly, a soft drumbeat beneath the noise of the kitchen. You nod, satisfied, and draw the loaf out, placing it on the table where steam curls from its surface. Another follows, then another, each lined neatly in rows. The scent now floods the entire kitchen, even managing to soften the sharpness of onion and fish that lingers from earlier. Everyone breathes a little deeper, drawn closer by the promise of bread. For a brief moment, the kitchen seems calmer, the chaos soothed by the simple rhythm of baking. Reality check. Within an hour, most of it will be gone, swallowed by soldiers and servants who barely notice the work behind it. Still, you can't help but feel a flicker of pride as you set the loaves aside to cool. They crackle faintly as the crusts settle, a sound as satisfying as the smell. You wipe flour from your hands, leaving streaks across an already filthy apron, and glance toward the trays being prepared. Trenchers of bread soon to be heaped with meat and puddings for the Lord's hall. The bread may soothe the garrison, but the feast above requires more spectacle, and soon you'll be carrying trays up narrow staircases, balancing dishes while hoping no one notices the grease stains trailing behind you. You try to keep working, turning the spit slowly, but your vision blurs. The venison sizzles, dripping fat into the flames, each hiss sending up a new plume of smoke that curls into your face. You wipe your eyes with the back of your sleeve, which only grinds in soot. The sting sharpens, and you mutter under your breath. Not quite a curse, not quite a prayer, just the groan of someone who knows they'll be half blind before dinner is served. The rafters themselves are black, coated thick with years of smoke that never found its way out. Hanging herbs and strings of onions sway slightly in the haze, each leaf and skin already infused with the flavor of soot. Peculiar as it seems, some cooks believed this constant exposure toughened the lungs, making you less prone to illness. You cough hard enough to doubt the wisdom. A scullion fans the fire with a set of bellows, sending sparks upward in a rush of orange. The sudden flare pushes even more smoke into the room, and everyone around you erupts into a chorus of coughs. A boy drops a ladle, clattering into the flagstones. Someone else swears softly, fanning their face with an apron. The kitchen becomes less workplace and more trial by fire. You blink rapidly, trying to clear your vision, and lean back from the hearth. Tears spill freely now, tracking streaks down your soot-darkened cheeks. If anyone asks later, you'll insist you weren't crying over the venison, but they may not believe you. Reality check. Nothing says flavor quite like a cook openly weeping into the stew. Still, the work continues. You stir a pot, the broth already darkened by stray flecks of ash. You wipe your nose, sniff, and return to the spit. The meat glistens, nearly ready, but the air feels thicker than ever. Even the dog skulks away from the hearth, seeking clearer air by the door. Finally, someone cracks a shutter, letting in a thin blade of daylight. It does little to help. The smoke drifts lazily out, but most of it lingers stubbornly, as if it too has duties to perform. You shake your head, eyes still stinging, and mutter that one day, perhaps centuries from now, someone will invent chimneys. Until then, every dish you serve will carry not only the taste of salt and fat, but also the subtle seasoning of your own watery eyes. You sniff once more, adjust the spit with aching arms, and glance toward the ovens, where bread waits to be judged not by clocks, but by instinct and smell alone. You step away from the smoky hearth, grateful for even a short reprieve, and turn toward the long stone ovens lining the far wall. Their mouths glow faintly, heat shimmering in waves that lick out into the kitchen air. The bread for the day waits nearby in neat, rounded loaves, their pale surfaces dusted with flour. They look almost innocent now, though you know well how quickly innocence can turn into ash when left a moment too long. With no clocks, no hourglasses, and certainly no indulgence of idleness, timing the bake is an art of its own. You rely on sight and scent, the darkening of crust, the swelling of dough, the faint golden edge just beginning to form. You slide the loaves in with a long-handled peel, the motion practiced, the wood smooth in your palms. Reality check. If you misjudge the timing, you'll have two choices: hard black stones that could double as weapons, or pale, doughy lumps that no one will forgive you for. You crouch near the oven's opening, the heat brushing your face, and inhale. The air grows richer with every moment, the aroma of yeast and smoke mingling, filling the chamber with something almost comforting. You close your eyes briefly, letting the smell guide you. Then open them again to peer into the glowing mouth. You balance the heavy tray on your forearms, its weight testing the strength that stale bread and weak ale barely gave you. The loaves you baked earlier have been split, hollowed into thick slabs of bread known as trenchers, each one sturdy enough to act as both plate and sponge. Onto them you heap slices of roasted meat, puddings dark with blood and oats, and dribbles of gravy that seep slowly into the bread. The stairwell is narrow, winding sharply upward, and each step creaks under your boots. The threat of punishment is real, but so is hunger. And today, hunger wins. You chew quickly, wiping your hands on your apron, eyes flicking toward the door. A scullion shuffles past carrying ash in a bucket, too tired to notice. You exhale slowly, shoulders loosening, as though you've just survived a battle. Reality check. All this danger for a mouthful of dairy hardly seems noble, but in the hierarchy of kitchens, small victories taste the sweetest. You close the cupboard carefully, making sure the wedge looks untouched, and retreat to your bench. The taste still clings to your teeth, mingling oddly with the smoke and onions that saturate everything else. It feels almost like a secret feast, invisible to anyone but you. And as you sit back, you hear the steward's steps echo once more down the stairwell, his voice already barking about pots and scrubbing. The moment of indulgence ends. Your hands ache, your stomach is fuller by only a bite, and your next task looms, hauling greasy pots to the water and scouring them with sand until your knuckles crack. The tray wobbles, meat shifting, puddings trembling, and you silently beg gravity for mercy. Reality check. Castle kitchens are not designed with convenience in mind. Carrying a feast up stone stairs is equal parts skill, balance, and prayer. At the top, the hall opens wide, filled with the low hum of voices, the scrape of benches, and the laughter of men-at-arms already on their first cups of ale. You make your way to the high table, setting the trenchers down with as much grace as sore arms allow. The bread plates look sturdy for now, though you know their destiny, to soak up sauce until they collapse in a soggy heap. Servants hover behind the Lord's chair, ready with knives to carve and pour. You step back, watching as the bread begins its slow transformation from plate to meal, gravy darkening its edges, juices dripping through to the wood beneath. Peculiar practice though it is, the trenchers will not go to waste. Once too soggy for noble fingers, they'll be gathered, piled into baskets, and passed to the lower tables, or, failing that, tossed out to the dogs who wait eagerly by the door. One particularly ambitious hound slips between benches now, nose twitching as it tracks the scent of dripping fat. A boy tries to shoo it back, but the dog knows better than anyone that patience pays. By the end of the feast, it will feast as well. You bow slightly, then turn to collect another tray from the boy panting behind you. His tray lists to the side, a trencher already sliding dangerously close to the edge. You grab it in time, saving the hall from a splattered pudding catastrophe, though your sleeve bears the stain for the rest of the evening. Reality check. For every noble diner who savors a slice of venison, there's a weary cook downstairs scrubbing grease from their only tunic. You descend the stairs again, the echo of laughter and clinking cups following you down into the smoky cavern of the kitchen. The feast above may glitter with meat and song, but you below eye the scraps that might fall unnoticed, a heel of cheese perhaps, if fortune smiles. And with that thought, you sidle toward the larder, ears pricked for the steward's footsteps. You slip back into the kitchen, tray finally emptied, arms aching from the climb. The noise of the hall still drifts faintly down the stairwell, but here the clamor is replaced by the low hiss of the fire and the shuffle of servants tidying. Your eyes dart toward the larder. Inside, under lock and key, rests one of the kitchen's most precious treasures, cheese. The steward guards it as carefully as coin, counting wheels and wedges with the precision of a tax collector. Yet now, with him distracted in the hall, you edge closer, every step soft against the flagstones. The air near the larder is cooler, tinged with the sharp tang of milk turned dense and strong. Reality check. You may feed lords venison and puddings, but you, the cook who prepares it all, are left salivating over a sliver of cheese like a thief in your own home. You pry open the cupboard just enough to reach inside. Your fingers brush against a small wedge, crumbly at the edges, firm at its heart. You snap off a piece and slip it quickly into your mouth. The flavor blooms immediately, sharp, salty, richer than the stew and breads you've handled all morning. For a moment you let it linger on your tongue, savoring a luxury that feels stolen in more ways than one. A peculiar memory surfaces, tales of punishment for those caught sneaking cheese. Not the whip, not the stocks, but being forced to eat spoiled cheese, moldy and sour, as a lesson in cure. You grimace at the thought, though it doesn't stop you from reaching for another crumb. You haul the first pot outside, its iron belly still slick with fat that clings as stubbornly as a barnacle. The cold air greets you with a sting, sharper than the smoke you left behind in the kitchen. You set the pot down by the trough, where water glitters in the pale light, a thin skin of ice trembling on its surface. Reality check. No amount of weak ale or stolen cheese prepares you for the joy of plunging your hands into winter water at dawn. You try to focus on the words, but your mind drifts. First to the pots, still waiting, then to the stew that must be stirred, then to the bread you hope has cooled enough to cut. The scent of incense curls through the air, sweet and heavy, but it doesn't quite mask the stew on your tunic or the onions on your breath. A boy 2 benches over pinches his nose discreetly, and you fight back a small smile. Peculiar tales say that prayers offered while still carrying the smell of food are doubly blessed, that the aroma counts as an offering of labor. Whether true or not, you cling to the thought, letting it soothe your embarrassment as you mumble your responses in time with the rest. The priest's voice drones on, steady and practiced. Sunlight breaks faintly through stained glass, coloring the smoke of incense with patches of red and gold. You close your eyes, letting the rhythm of the service carry you, though fatigue presses heavier with each moment. It is less revelation and more rest, but perhaps that too has value. Reality check. Faith may purify the soul, but it does little for the state of your tunic. You shift on the bench, wondering if onion is now part of your eternal scent, as inescapable as sin itself. When the final blessing is spoken, you bow your head, cross yourself, and shuffle back toward the kitchen. The service may have cleansed your spirit, but your hands are still cracked, your stomach still empty, and the steward is already waiting with a night complaining of indigestion. You break the ice with a stick, watching shards drift across the surface like little glass boats. Then you lower the pot, the chill biting through the metal into your palms. Grease floats instantly to the top, forming cloudy swirls that refuse to disperse. You sigh and reach for the sand kept in a bucket nearby. Soap is a rare guest here, too precious to waste on pots. Sand and ash, rough and gritty, scour far better and far harsher. You plunge your hands into the freezing water, scooping grit, and begin to scrub. The pot resists, each stroke squealing against the iron. Your knuckles scrape along the rough edge, skin splitting where the cold has already made it brittle. Pain needles up your fingers, and you clench your teeth, forcing the motion to continue. Peculiar as it seems, some say ash purifies as well as cleans, that it strips away not just grease but ill fortune. You're doubtful. Your fortune feels much the same as before, and your hands certainly worse. The second pot waits beside you, its surface crusted with what was once pudding but now resembles mortar. You attack it with renewed vigor, spraying water across your tunic. The icy droplets trickle down your sleeves, making you shiver from elbow to wrist. A scullion nearby curses as his own pot tips, splashing half its contents across his boots. You exchange a weary glance, the sort of look that says, "We chose the wrong trade." Your hands grow red, raw, until they feel twice their size. The grit works, though, slowly, steadily. The black iron emerges clean again, shining faintly in the weak light. You pause to flex your fingers, joints stiff as though they belong to an older body. Reality check. Every pot scoured buys you one more ache to carry into sleep. When the last of the grease has lifted away, you heave the pot upright and set it aside. Steam rises faintly from the trough now, water stirred cloudy with ash and fat. You wipe your hands on your apron, though it does little, the cloth already stiff with stains from a dozen past scrubbings. Your fingers throb, cracked at the seams, tiny reminders of every meal this castle consumes. You blow on them gently, but the relief is fleeting. The bell from the chapel rings across the courtyard, a hollow sound pulling you back inside. The day demands prayer as much as labor, though you smell of onions and ash more than sanctity. The chapel bell tolls, its deep clang rolling across the courtyard and through the drafty door of the kitchen. You pause mid-scrub, hands red and raw from cold water, and exchange a glance with another cook. The look says what no one dares to voice. Surely God knows how much work waits on the hearth. But rules are rules, and even a cook steeped in smoke is expected to kneel with folded hands. You wipe your palms on your apron, though the gesture is pointless. The fabric is stiff with grease, and the smell of onions clings so firmly it may as well be stitched into the cloth. You sigh, adjust your cloak, and trudge toward the chapel with the others, still carrying the scent of stew like a badge. Reality check. Nothing tests devotion quite like praying beside someone who smells like boiled cabbage. Inside, the chapel is dim, the air cooler and clearer than the kitchen's smoke-thick haze. Candles flicker along the altar, their flames small but steady, casting long shadows across the stone floor. You shuffle into your place among the servants, heads bowed, shoulders brushing. The murmur of voices rises, a chorus of prayer weaving through the stillness. You barely step back into the smoky kitchen before the steward intercepts you, one eyebrow raised in the permanent expression of someone suspicious of your every move. He clears his throat and jerks his thumb toward the corner, where a knight sits on a stool looking distinctly less heroic than his armor suggests. His hand rests heavily on his stomach, his face pale, his lips pursed in misery. Indigestion again. A peculiar superstition lingers here, that killing a rat without a prayer dooms the kitchen to famine, as if the rodent's spirit will summon its kin in vengeance. Whether true or not, no one dares skip the ritual. The boy mutters, "Amen," with shaking hands, then looks around for approval. The others nod gravely, satisfied that the balance has been restored. Meanwhile, two more rats scurry boldly along a beam above the hearth, their silhouettes outlined by firelight. You sigh, knowing today's victory is only momentary. The grain will be patched, the traps reset, and still the whiskers will return by nightfall. The smell of flour and fur hangs faintly in the air now, mingling with onions and smoke. You wrinkle your nose, brushing crumbs from your lap. Reality check. The Lord's feast may sparkle upstairs, but down here, half your effort is simply guarding the food from creatures smaller than a loaf of bread. The boys, flushed with triumph, drag the sack back into place and lean on their sticks, proud as knights who've won a joust. You offer them a faint smile, though your mind is already drifting toward the hearth. For all its smoke and heat, it is still the only place in this kitchen where you can sit for a moment, apron stiff with grease, body weary, and rest beside the fire you've tended since dawn. Reality check. No matter how grand their titles, knights still suffer the same fate as anyone who eats too much meat too quickly. And of course, the solution falls not to priests or physicians, but to you, the cook who apparently doubles as an apothecary. You rummage through the shelves, pulling jars and bundles of herbs. Pepper is the first answer, ground into warm broth to cut through phlegm. You add mint leaves, dried and crumbling, their sharp scent promising to soothe the stomach even if they do little else. A dash of honey follows, partly for flavor, partly to disguise the bitterness of whatever you're really giving him. As the mixture warms over the fire, the knight groans softly, tapping his gauntleted fingers against the table. You stir with measured calm, though inside you can't help but smirk. Here is a man trained to wield sword and shield, undone by his third helping of pudding. A peculiar custom comes to mind. Some kitchens swore by steeping burnt bread in ale as a cure, the char meant to absorb ill humors. You glance at the oven, where a forgotten crust blackens even now. Perhaps later you'll try that, though at this moment the mint seems kinder. You ladle the steaming concoction into a wooden cup and carry it carefully over. The knight takes it with a grimace, eyeing the floating leaves as though you're trying to poison him. He sips, winces, then drinks more deeply. A shudder runs through him, followed by a resigned sigh. Whether it works or not, the act of drinking seems enough to convince him relief is on its way. Reality check. Your remedies are less science than theater. If the knight feels better, it is as likely the warmth of the cup in his hands as the herbs in his belly. Still, when he nods weakly and mutters thanks, you allow yourself a moment of satisfaction. You return to the bench, wiping mint from your fingers, and glance at the storeroom. A squeak draws your attention, high, sharp, and far too familiar. Between the sacks of grain, small shadows dart. Rats. You sigh, already knowing what comes next. The never-ending battle of kitchen versus vermin. The squeak comes again, sharper this time, followed by the sound of scrambling feet. You glance across the kitchen and see two boys darting between sacks of grain, brandishing sticks longer than themselves. The sacks bulge with precious stores of flour and barley, each one a target for the whiskered thieves slipping through gaps in the stone. The boys swing wildly, more noise than accuracy as the rats streak along the wall, tails vanishing into cracks too small for a finger. Rats are a constant, as expected as smoke or soot. Where there is grain, there are vermin. Where there is meat, there are teeth waiting to gnaw it. The kitchen boys take their battle seriously, though their strikes more often hit each other's shins than the intended prey. You shake your head, half amused, half weary. Reality check. In a castle full of guards and armored men, it is still the smallest scullions who fight the truest siege against rodents. One boy yelps as a rat darts over his boot, then brings his stick down with surprising force. The creature squeals, a sharp note that cuts through the hum of the kitchen. The boy freezes, breathless, and the older scullion immediately hisses at him. "Say the prayer, quick!" You watch as the boy stammers out a hurried blessing, words tumbling awkwardly but earnestly. At last, when the trays have been cleared, the pots scoured, and the steward's sharp voice has faded into the upper halls, you let yourself sink onto the worn bench by the hearth. Your apron crackles faintly as you fold yourself down, the fabric so stiff with layers of grease and ash that it could almost stand upright on its own. You stretch your legs toward the fire, toes aching, the flagstones beneath them still cold despite the day's heat. Without it, there would be no feast in the hall above, no garrison strong enough to fight, no family warm through the coldest night. Your breath slows. The ache in your body eases under the blanket of exhaustion. The fire crackles one last time, sending sparks into the dark like tiny stars. You let them fade from your vision, slipping into dreams shaped by stew, bread, and smoke. The castle kitchen has given you sustenance and suffering alike. Yet as sleep takes you, you understand. Without your labor, no bell would ring for dinner, no hearth would warm the walls, and no hall would echo with laughter. You surrender at last, drifting into silence, knowing the embers will keep their quiet vigil until dawn. End of script. Sweet dreams. The hearth, which demanded your labor since before dawn, now gives back the one gift it always holds: warmth. The flames lick lazily at the logs, embers glowing steady and low. You lean back, feeling the day slide from your shoulders in heavy waves. Reality check. It is not exactly the cozy scene you might imagine. No soft blankets, no gentle silence. Instead, it's the chorus of servants snoring in every corner, and the sour perfume of boiled cabbage still clinging to the rafters. Around you, the kitchen lies in twilight calm. A dog curls by the door, tail twitching in sleep. A boy snores loudly from the far bench, his head tipped back at an angle so precarious you half expect it to topple. The fire pops occasionally, shooting tiny sparks upward, their glow reflecting faintly on the smoke-stained beams. You close your eyes for a moment, and behind your lids you see the blur of the day. Barrels of salted fish, clouds of flour, endless onions, pots of gluey stew. The rhythm of stirring, chopping, fetching, scrubbing repeats in your mind until it becomes almost soothing. The heat on your shins, the cool stone at your back, the faint hiss of the hearth, all combine into something that feels, if not restful, at least survivable. A peculiar custom surfaces in your thoughts. Some believed falling asleep by the kitchen fire let you dream of the next day's meals, a sort of culinary fortune-telling. You chuckle softly. If true, your dreams will likely be filled with onions, smoke, and more cauldrons large enough to drown in. You tug your cloak tighter, though it smells as much of grease as your apron. The warmth makes your eyelids heavy, the snoring around you becoming a strange sort of lullaby. Reality check. This is the cook's luxury, not a feather bed, not fine sheets, but the chance to sit without moving, to let the fire's glow ease you toward sleep. The logs settle with the sigh, sending up a final puff of sparks. You let your head tip forward, chin nearly to your chest, and surrender to the tiredness that has chased you since dawn. And as the fire hums softly at your feet, you drift into dreams with smoke in your hair and blisters on your hands, the final duty of a cook who would not last a day, yet somehow always endures one more. You let your body fold further into the bench, every joint heavy, every muscle slack. The fire hums low before you, glowing with that slow, patient rhythm of embers that have outlasted the day. Smoke lingers in your hair, woven into the strands so tightly that no washing will ever quite remove it. You breathe it in as though it is part of you now, not comfort, not punishment, simply the scent of the life you serve. Your hands rest open in your lap, palms rough and red. Blisters swell along your fingers, souvenirs from stirring the great cauldron and hauling pots larger than yourself. The pain is dulled by fatigue, the sharp sting softened into a steady throb. Reality check. You have no balm, no rest cure, only the hope that by morning your grip will still hold a knife, a yoke, a ladle. The kitchen lies quiet at last. Shadows deepen across the flagstones, the faint rustle of straw mattresses carrying from the loft above. Servants breathe in uneven chorus, some snoring already, others murmuring half-dreams into their blankets. The dog by the door shifts, sighs, then settles again, his tail twitching in sleep. The fire offers its final comfort, warmth radiating outward in uneven waves. You lean toward it slightly, eyelids heavy, letting the glow blur your sight. Peculiar as it may seem, you think of the kitchen not only as prison, but as heart, the place where every meal begins, where armies are fed, where lords dine, where even prayers are seasoned with smoke.